Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on The Daily Debate, and I would like to welcome once again Dr. Nabil Elmawla, Professor of Projects and International Trade. Thank you once again, Doctor, for coming in. As we've seen in this report, President Sisi had personally congratulated the Chinese president on the occasion of the anniversary of 100 years for the founding of the Communist Party. Now, for a president to congratulate another president on such an occasion, what does this indicate about the importance of the relationship between the two countries?
To know exactly what it indicates, we've got to remind ourselves of the very tight, the Arab Republic of Egypt and the PRC established diplomatic relationships in 1956. Egypt was the first Arab and African country to recognize PCR to establish diplomatic ties with China. Egypt was an early, strong supporter of the PRC, right to reclaim its seat in the United Nations, and has continuously backed the One China principle and Beijing reunification aspiration. That was the base of the relationship between Egypt and China. Among all this, for more than 60 years, which is almost 65 years, Egypt and China have maintained equal and friendly relations, traditionally focused on promoting 6 major fields: political trust, mutual support, practical cooperation, all fields, promoting exchange cooperation, strengthening cooperation in anti-terrorism and law enforcement, security, and improving cultural exchanges, tourism, and other fields. That led to intense diplomatic exchanges between the top leaders during or among such period, especially when Abdel Fattah Sisi, our president, has revived the relationship between Egypt and China. So intense diplomatic exchange between the top leaders and frequent high-level reciprocal visits illustrate the depth of bilateral relations.
Now, Dr. Nabil, as you've correctly said, this is 65 years celebration. Egypt is celebrating 65 years of its relationship with China since the establishment of China. But now, as you've correctly said, specifically during the past 8 years, we've seen a shift on all levels in terms of the strengthening ties between these two countries. And we're talking about China being the second world economic power. Let's talk about how has this relationship changed? What has led to this further strengthening of the relationship between Egypt and China during the past 8 years?
Firstly, the will between the two leaders of Egypt and China that they want to promote, as I've already said, for more than 65 years, Egypt and China have maintained equal and friendly relations, traditionally focused on different fields, six major fields. They have been exchanging visits between Egypt and China for the leaders themselves to develop, especially in economic sector, the projects which is in interest in China and is an interest in Egypt on mutual basis.
Now, we're also seeing maybe one of the most important part of the strengthened relation today. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Health, they spoke at a press conference earlier today announcing the manufacturing of the Chinese vaccine in Egypt. And they're quite at big doses. We know that 300,000 per day, and they're asking for China to boost that up to double, to 600,000 per day. Now, the COVID-19 has come in and stepped into the world during the past 2 years and changed a lot of things dramatically, especially in terms of the world order. But China, although many people, all people around the world have pinpointed it on China for the virus to first come out from, yet it had managed the virus and handled the pandemic very well. And we saw Egypt was one of the first few countries who stood by China at the beginning of the pandemic. We saw the Minister of Health paying a visit to China. And when the pandemic started hitting hard in the second and third wave here in Egypt, we saw China showing full support to Egypt. What does that reflect on a world international level?
That would reflect the mutual trust which has been maintained between two leaders of China and Egypt. That would reflect the valuable cooperations which is required and being insisted on between the two leaders for developing the mutual benefits for both countries in Egypt or in China, as you have already mentioned. And as we all know, that at the beginning of the pandemic, what Egypt did is they supported China. They have sent whatever they can send, and the Minister of Health has been traveling over there. And currently, China is manufacturing, or they gave the permission, they provided permission for Egypt to manufacture the vaccination or the vaccine. That means a mutual trust and maintaining the confidence and maintaining the goodwill for developing the mutual interest for both countries by the time.
As part of trade, or from a trade economic perspective, we know from a health perspective this is a very, very valid step for Egypt to ensure that a country with 100 million population is being vaccinated. Not only that, but anybody who's living in Egypt, coming into Egypt, will be able to be vaccinated and frequently get the dose when they need so, according to their schedule, of course. But the thing is, from a trade perspective, how beneficial is it for Egypt to hold this project, if I may say, of manufacturing the vaccines?
It's not only trade. It reflects a lot of benefits for Egypt in trade, wise, and politics, economics. You can name it whatever you want to say, because whenever you have a vaccine for one of the recent and kill, which caused pandemic for the whole world in almost 2 years, a couple of years now, I don't know how. And
we're almost 2 years now. It seems like forever. That's definitely true.
That's correct. That means you got one of the solutions which worldwide countries may depend on that solution for a while. And as well as China would consider Egypt is a strategic partner,
a market,
and a market for the Chinese products and Chinese economic partners in Egypt. That means a very promising relationship for the future between two countries.
Dr. Nabil, speaking of Chinese products and goods, and it is not a secret, but the whole world is all, sort of filled with the Chinese products. There's everything that we use basically on daily basis is made in China, everywhere, even the biggest brands and chains. So that of course does give a perfect indication of how strong economically China is. But if we're going to talk about the market, the Chinese market in Egypt, how do you reflect on that, especially from your field of expertise, charge of trade and international projects? Let's talk about the Chinese projects and the Chinese trade with Egypt. How has it been and how is it going to be in the near future, taking into consideration the expansion that Egypt is going through? We have the economic zone in the Suez, we have the new Suez Canal, we've got the new administrative capital, we've got new cities, we've got smart cities, we've got Alamein. So there's a lot of investment hub that would attract foreigners. Speaking of the Chinese market in specific, how do you see that?
To say how can I see that, we've got to remind ourselves that in December 2014, President Al-Sisi met with Chinese President Xi, and they upgraded the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. In tandem, they pledged to boost political, economic, military, culture, and technological cooperation. And no coordinate policies at regional and international level. During this, their meeting, they agreed the countries will work together on MSRI, which is Marine Silk Road Initiative, and SREB, while Al-Sisi solicited FDI, the foreign direct investment, for a second Suez Canal. That means that China would see again Egypt as a strategic partner. When they do projects with over $20 billion in the new capital, in the chemical sector, in health sector, in petrochemical, in road construction, contracting, trade. That means that there is something very fruitful and bilateral for both countries, for Egypt and China.
Now, Egypt is also in Africa, and Egypt is a gateway to the African continent, and that's maybe one of the most important thing about speaking of strategic partnership in this regard, as you've correctly said, specifically that China has had all eyes on the African continent for so long, but it's in fact starting to invest infrastructure-wise and developmental projects and so forth in the African continent. Are we seeing a different shift in the market of the African continent in general now with the Chinese projects?
It is.
In what perspective?
And at least let me say that there are 5 countries which has been mentioned in the Silk Road BRI Silk Road
initiative.
Yeah, correct. Starting from Egypt, and Egypt for the strategic location for Egypt, which is you can consider Mediterranean, Red Sea, European, African,
Middle East as well.
Middle East. That means you are talking with a very strong partner. China is talking with very strong partner for the future partnership and future strategic alliance.
I also want to speak about the sort of other sectors that have also directly influenced the Egyptian economy, and we're talking about maybe right before the pandemic or up until when the pandemic kicked off. We've seen a shift in the Chinese tourists who, it's a new market for Egypt to attract Chinese tourism, and as you've correctly said at the beginning, the different diplomatic approach that took place during President Assisi's presidency had also echoed and reflected in the Chinese society and communities that had made them realize that, well, come and visit Egypt. Integrating on the cultural and touristic level the nations, how does that add up to the strengthened relationship between 2 countries?
That means the closer we are, the closer both countries are, the more stronger ties between both countries, the more culture exposure for both countries, the more projects both countries were exposed. And currently there are schools which will start to educate and learn the Chinese language in the early stages.
Which is very interesting. Why is Chinese language now going into a form of a competition of an international language? Because we have always known that forever English was the international language, and we're seeing a shift in this regard. What does this indicate?
That indicates that the problem with the Chinese, that most of the people over there, they are still the big and the giant businessmen, they hardly speak English. So to know exactly how can you deal with the country itself, how you can cooperate with the country, with the top leaders, the other businessmen, you've got to cope with the language of that country to be able to maintain and to strengthen the economic relationship with them. That means the very important China is for the Egyptian leaders and the Egyptian economy.
Yeah, you spoke about the importance of the Chinese cooperation with Egypt on all levels. Let's see now the importance of Egypt to the Chinese. What kind of, or what are the most important products that can compete in the Chinese market from your perspective?
The Chinese product?
Chinese product, no, the Egyptian products.
The Egyptian product.
That can be, I mean, we know now the Chinese, how they're benefiting from the relationship with Egypt, but what's in it for, the Egyptian, what can they in regard give to the Chinese market, or how can they penetrate their products or goods or services in the Chinese market?
Actually, we have already started, Egypt has already started and opened new markets for the Egyptian exports for the non-petroleum sector. We have started, Egypt has opened the market for the citrus, for example, which has been increased dramatically for the Chinese market, and lots more products in the export field, in the export sector, to be exported. And China marble, for example, is one of the giant products which will penetrate the Chinese market. When you talk about marble, if you've been to where the marble is being manufactured here, you will find 90% of Chinese are controlling the factories over there.
Interesting.
With cash, with the hard currency, with everything.
What is the role of the Egyptian-Chinese Business Council in supporting the bilateral relations between both countries?
That's very important in approaching both cultures with ease, for expanding the culture and having both people, both people working in different sectors, and even the people of each country itself, for knowing more about the culture of the other country, and vice versa, for correcting whatever being understood wrongly in the past.
Now, you know, Egypt is changing.
And of course, developing
yes.
the economic growth.
Now, Egypt is, of course, in the process of development, and a lot of renovations taking place. But if we want to talk about from your perspectives, the main obstacles that are facing the Chinese investors in Egypt, what can you recall?
The major obstacles is, number one is the language. This is number one.
It's a barrier.
The barrier, yeah, one of the barriers. Number two is Chinese has a very focused mind for the profitability of the market and the stability, and that has been in recent years that has been erased, and that has been corrected by the Egyptian government and and our leader, for having more focus on the real opportunities which is rising in the Egyptian market for the Chinese.
If you want to talk about ways of eliminating such obstacles, you've only mentioned two, but ways of eliminating obstacles, do you believe that some kind of solution can happen, some kind of further cooperation between various institutes, possibly a more further strengthened active role by the Chinese-Egyptian Business Council, for instance? How do you see these kind of obstacles being eliminated to sort of reduce this barrier or gap?
More business meetings, more business missions in both countries, from China to Egypt and Egypt to China. More exposure to the ties between two countries, which is a responsibility of the Egyptian embassy and the Chinese embassy, the Egyptian council, the Chinese council, and the culture centers in both countries. More in-depth knowledge for the Chinese culture, and more in-depth knowledge for the needs of the market and consumer behavior in China, because it is somehow different, and normally it would be different than European consumers or US consumers. That all will lead at the end for more growth in the economic development sector.
Yeah, speaking of economic development, and let's talk more about the economic and trade cooperation zone, which is located at the Suez Canal Economic Zone, as I've said, and that was one of the big boost of projects and investments between Egypt and China. It's been also a very attracting facility for the Chinese market. Let's talk about how do you see that today, as you know, there's been a lot of tunnels that have been inaugurated. The infrastructures has changed dramatically since the announcement first took place a couple of years ago. Is that because you've mentioned a couple of moments ago about maybe one of the obstacles is the continuity and stability of these projects? So has that changed their perspective, and possibly how big is the Chinese investment in this new area, the economic zone?
Good. One of the major factors which any investor in the world would look at when they try to make a decision or take a decision for investing in any country is the political risk, political risk factor. Currently, and our leadership, our leaders, which is Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the government, they have changed the vision of the Chinese part, that we are stable. We've been fighting terrorism. We are very constructive. We are developing. We are building everything. We are the land of opportunities. This is exactly what happened in the last couple of years, which has, on which that watch the basis of changing the mind of the giant investors, Chinese investors, for coming over to Egypt, signing with new capital and new cities and the other sectors investment.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to discuss further more about this. I wanted to also ask you from a political perspective the role that China plays on a political level around the world, the UN Security Council, and having a permanent seat as well, if you'd have a take on that. But allow us to go up to the second report, if you don't mind, Dr. Nabil.
Sure.
And 65 years of cooperation between Egypt and China, and a lot has been taking place, and on all levels it seems to be that both countries, both leadership in specific, have common grounds when it comes to the economic, cultural and social perspective, and possibly even the political one. Let's take a look.